Hello, everybody. Thanks again for the conference and Harry Lucas and EAF and everything else. It's always awesome to be here. It's always my favorite concert. It's like a concert. Conference of the year. So I'm going to talk about implementing IBL in an Intro to Proof course, but basically everything I'm going to say sort of in my mind applies more broadly to any proof-based course. There's 100 different ways to get a hold of me. The slides will eventually be up after I fix any typos that I see while I'm talking, if you want to get a hold of them. So email me or look on my webpage or something like that. My perspective while I'm speaking is that I'm mostly going to be talking to sort of new users. A lot of times when I talk to people about IBL, they want to know, well, how do I get started? What are the nuts and bolts? How do you grade presentations? How do you do all this? But I'm only talking for 15 minutes, and I could probably talk for days about this. So in my mind, this is like the movie trailer for a deeper discussion. So if you have questions, I'd love to chat about it. I'm going to sort of relay some things that happened in my most recent iteration of my Intro to Proof class, and I think I've done it now 5 times. So I sort of feel like I've honed in on a sort of good way to do things, but there's always room for improvement. So if you have suggestions, I'll take them. So there's a few things up here about me, but one of the things that I want to point out here is on the last 2 bullets there that I never had an IBL class as a student. And initially when I started teaching, I modeled my teaching after who I thought my best teachers were. And since I never had that experience, I was mostly doing direct instruction. And about 5 years ago, I decided to, I guess I can't count, 4 years ago, I decided to have my first full-blown IBL class, and I've sort of never looked back. And now pretty much all my classes are IBL. Calculus is sort of IBL light. But everything else is sort of mostly a modified Moore method. So here's the big picture. I do a collaborative Moore method approach. I'm going to talk about my Intro to Proof class, but it's mostly any proof-based course. If you want to look at my syllabus and the assignments and the exams, everything's posted on the web address there. You don't necessarily have to write it down. You could just shoot me an email and it'll be in the slides. That's a live link you could click on. So go there if you want to check out more details. If I don't say something, you can sort of poke around at that. So here's my approach to IBL. I often have discussions with people about what the heck is IBL. And this is sort of, I've honed in on these sort of 2 bullets here under the first bullet, which is that students should, as much as possible, be responsible for guiding the acquisition of knowledge and validating the ideas presented. This really dovetails nicely with what Andy was just talking about. I want the students to be the authorities on whether things are accurate, valid, and true, not necessarily looking to me. So for me, that's what IBL is all about. And the other thing, too, is I just want to get the heck out of the way and see what they can do. That's really important. Just stand back, keep your mouth shut, and let them rip and see what happens. So for my Intro to Proof course, here are my goals that I relay to my students. These aren't necessarily the ones that are in the course catalog, but for me, this is what the course is really about. I want to be able to produce examples and counterexamples. I want them to validate arguments, make conjectures, produce valid proofs. I want them to learn to write. And oftentimes they get good feedback. They're like, I learned to write more in this course than any other course I've ever had. And that's including their English courses, so I really like that. And these other ones are really important to me. I really want them to develop perseverance. I want them to be able to persist and to develop independence. Despite the collaboration that happens, I think they do develop some independence. People always ask, what's your grade breakdown? I've tweaked this a little bit, but I haven't really changed it the last few years. I've kind of have 3 categories: homework, presentation, and participation, and then I have 3 exams, 2 midterms, and a final. And the breakdowns are 25, 30, and 45 respectively. It works for me. I think what I try and do is not overweight something. I'm trying to find this fine line between sort of a carrot on a stick and assessing what really needs to be assessed. The exams are a mix of in-class and take-home exams. So my students probably would argue that I give them 6 exams, but it's 3 things in 2 halves. So here's a list of the course content. I'm not gonna read that to you, but that's what I do in my Intro to Proof course. And most of that stuff is required. But there's one thing there that's probably not in most Intro to Proof courses. Is this topology of the real line. And actually, this is the order in which I do stuff. So if you look at this, that sort of topology, I do some open and closed set stuff. It's something they've never seen before, and it's really, really hard for them. And I hit them with it pretty early. Another thing about my course content is that on day 1, we just jump into some number theory. I don't talk about how to write a proof or anything. It's just some theorems. And on the next day, I just want to see what they can do. And I make this pretty clear to them that we're diving into the deep end head first. and then we'll back up. So I first dive in and do some proofs and sort of just see what comes up, see what people can do, and then we kind of go back and start with the typical truth table, negation, logic stuff, then do some set theory, then into some topology stuff. And that's sort of my optional topic that I put there. And then the rest is a pretty standard fare for Intro to Proof course. The problem sequence that I use, I initially grabbed from Stan Yoshinobu and Matt, but I've changed it so much it doesn't really look like theirs anymore, and I've added a lot of stuff to it. But they're available for free if you want to use them on GitHub. The URL is there. So the source is there, and you can go grab it and modify it to your heart's content. And I would love it if people use them. I've had a few people use them and give me good feedback, and they've constantly improved. Dave Richardson recently used them for an intro to a discrete math class and gave me lots of good feedback. And so they're in a pretty good form right now, and I'm pretty happy with them. But if there's something you want to add, you can add. If you want to delete stuff, rearrange stuff, rename stuff, they're yours to modify. I'd love to know if you used them and could sort of contribute back to them, but they're there for free, and I'm pretty happy with them. What's in the notes? Well, there's examples, but very few of them. But the sort of problems are broken down into exercise problems and theorems to prove. And the problems mostly are of the form, is this true or false? If it's false, give a counterexample. If it's true, prove it. And then the theorems, of course, are stated as true, and the students are meant to prove them. What are the rules of the game? Well, I tell them right from the very beginning on day one that these are the rules that we're going to abide by, that students aren't supposed to look at anything basically outside our universe. Anything inside the universe is fair game. Anything outside our class is not. So I don't want them looking at Wikipedia, outside resources, their math major cousin, or their Sol Khan uncle, or whatever. All that outside stuff is sort of forbidden. But anything in class is sort of fair game. And this is sort of extreme, but I stand by it as something that works. I allow my students to collaborate on their take-home exams. I see less clone copies of take-home exams since I started doing that than I did when I said they weren't allowed to work together. And it's really interesting, too, because they'll work on it right outside my office, and I'll listen to what they're doing, and it's just fantastic. I know exactly what's going on. And I give them a choice of problems, and even people who work together don't even do the same problems. So it works out really well for me, but I understand it might not for everyone else. And I also realize that I could encounter a group of students where I just can't pull that off. But so far, so good for me. And then there's still an in-class portion that they still have to work independently. So what's the day-to-day operation? If you were here for Andy's talk, he mentioned quite a bit of this. So I'll sort of do this a little bit quick. Each day, they're assigned 5 to 10 tasks. That's the exercises, the problems, and the theorems. 5 to 10, depending on what happened in the last class and how short or quick my experience has been on how much they can do those problems, how quickly. And they're due at the beginning of the next class. I call these this is the daily homework. The students are responsible for digesting new material outside of class. So those problems, we haven't talked about them yet. I just give them to them and then let them struggle with it a little bit. Occasionally, I'll give them some readings to do that are in the notes. And I have some screencasts that I've made, and sometimes the students will ask for screencasts. I'll sort of supplement with those things outside of class as well. When they get there, basically, it's students presenting the whole time, unless they request a sort of mini lecture on the spot. Then I might spend a little bit of time on that. But I walk in the room, and typically, there's a list on the board before I even get there, who's presenting what. They negotiate it before I even walk in the room, which is really nice. And that culture gets established pretty early on. I reserve the right to pull someone's name off the board. I actually have more of a problem with students wanting to present too much than I do with students who are presenting too little. So I sometimes say, I've heard enough from you. Sally, go sit down. So that goes over well. I'm not mean about it, but they sort of take that as a compliment and try and get the students who need more presentations to come to the board. So what's my job while I'm there? Well, I want to facilitate discussion. If it's quiet, I try and nudge them a little bit. If they're just not noticing something, we'll play Where's Waldo for a little while, and I'll nudge them with some Socratic questioning. And I also feel like, not necessarily artificially, but I want to reward them for every little positive thing that happens. It might just be like good board work, good eye contact, good listening, whatever it is. I try and find something positive to say. And at the end of every presentation, I always say, are there any comments, compliments, or any comments, questions, or compliments, to really hone in on that fact that they should sort of say things nice to each other. And it's not artificial. It works out pretty well, but that's my job. And my students always joke that my job is to sit in the corner, cross my arms, and say, but I do that too. So the students may request mini lectures or screencasts whenever they want, and I sort of do that on the fly. And then the students, after we've sort of done stuff in class, once a week, they type up problems from the previous week using LaTeX, and I grade those pretty harshly. These mini lectures are sort of interesting. I let them tell me when they need one. I don't really know when they're going to ask for one, so it keeps me on my toes. It's kind of interesting. And these could be 5-10 minutes of me giving more examples or working through something. But one of my students said, you know, the big difference between your mini lectures and the classes I usually sit on is that when I come into a class, and a teacher's lecturing, it's the first time I'm hearing something, I think, I'll figure this out later. But for Dana's mini lectures, I've already tried to figure it out, and I couldn't. And now I'm asking for help, and I hang on every word you say. And so I don't do it very often, but it's a big difference. They're really in tune when that happens because it's so rare. Student presentations is sort of a big topic, so I'll talk about this a little bit. I have one student at a time talking and writing, and I've modified that a little bit when I've had bigger classes. But that's the mode that I like, and it may not work for everybody. I give my students some benchmarks. I want them to present at least twice prior to each exam in order to receive a passing grade. So I've worded that strongly enough but ambiguously enough that I haven't told them exactly how much to shoot for. They're like, have I done enough? I said, no, you haven't done enough. Well, I've done 2. I'm like, well, then you can pass. So it keeps them on their toes, but it also gives them something to shoot for, some regular intervals. And that seems to work out pretty well for me. I take notes during their presentations, and I add it to the spreadsheet that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. At the end of each presentation, I write down a numerical score. That's mostly just to satisfy my need to have some sort of quantitative data in the spreadsheet. And I compute an average of their presentations, but honestly, I don't take that all that seriously. If Sally comes to the board and presents 3 of the hardest problems all semester long, that's better to me than Johnny doing 10 of the easiest ones. And so I try and take that stuff into account. So it's tricky to sort of navigate the spreadsheet, but it works out pretty well. And I stole that from basically Ted Behavior, that criteria there. The daily homework is pretty much the meat and potatoes of what we do every day. Those are the problems from the notes. They're assigned each day. That's what we cover. We pick up where we left off in the previous class. So I actually tell them what to work on, those 5 to 10 tasks. When the students walk in the room, there's a box of felt tip pens. And they all grab their pens. And there's a variety of colors in there. No one ever picks red, and they love purple. And sky blue is popular too. So they grab a felt tip pen, and that's basically what they're allowed to use all class period. I used to collect their homework at the beginning of class. I used to wait until the end. I hated collecting it at the beginning because they couldn't look at what they wrote. I hated collecting it at the end because I didn't know what the heck they had changed during class. And this sort of solved that problem for me, is that I now know what did they have when they walked in the room versus what did they have when they left. So they get it on the way into class, and they annotate the crap out of their presentations, and their work on the page while the student's presenting. And I don't have any data to really support this, but I firmly believe that the way that they write on their page with a felt tip pen is very different than they would if they didn't have it there. It's like they're grading their own work, and they're doing it sort of live and reflecting on it. There's no penalty for the use of the pen. They can write as much as they want. Their grade is solely based on what did they have done before class. So I have to sort of sometimes look underneath that layer of colored pen, but I just basically grade it on a check, minus, check, check plus scale based on the effort that they had before they came into class. And they love this. At least my students do. Some other people have tried it maybe and it doesn't work out so well for them, but I'm a huge fan of this. It's probably the most low-tech, awesome thing I've done. There's the weekly homework, which they go back and get 2 starred problems from the previous week and then turn those in the next week. And I have them type it up in LaTeX. I give them very minimal guidance for this, but they're allowed to ask for as much help as they want. I have my students using Write LaTeX, which is an online LaTeX editor for free. On my web page, the students just go to the place where the weekly assignments are and click Start Assignment, and boom, the page opens with my homework template already preloaded. And I've got notes in there, and they just start typing. It's really painless. So I help them a ton for 2 weeks, and then they don't ask any questions after that. So it works out flawlessly. They submit those to Canvas, which is an LMS. I grade those and go from there. So I'm going to skip a little bit here so I can show you one little thing. I knew I might not get to this, but let's look at that really quick. This is from my course evaluations this past semester. The course was intellectually challenging. 17 students, 100% said strongly agree. My general estimate of this course, excellent, 100%. So I'm pretty happy with that. And then last but not least, there's this really long quote. I don't have time for it, but here's my favorite of all time. This is a student quote: try, fail, understand, win. All right, I'll stop there.
So with the use of the felt tip pens, do you find that students organize their homework differently because after week 3 or whatever, they realize they want more room on the page, and so they give themselves more real estate when they write things up? Or
Yeah, they actually comment to me that they start spacing their work out a little bit differently. And some of them will actually have 2 copies. They'll have their copy, and then on the back, they'll write whatever happened on the board. Some of them write on the top. It's just whatever they decide that they end up wanting to do.
This is a question regarding the course itself. You said Intro to Proofs course. Is that like an analog to at another school, maybe Intro to Advanced Math or Foundations of Math? Or
Yeah,
those all
in
sort
fact,
of
the title at my new school is Foundations of Higher Mathematics.
The class that I taught last spring, I guess, I taught a discrete math class. And it's also sort of an introduction to proofs class, but we also have a Foundations of Math, Intro to Advanced Math class as well. And I found that some of my students felt that it was unfair that other students had the Foundations class, even though it wasn't a prerequisite or anything like that. I didn't treat those students with any sort of advantages. And in fact, I explicitly forbade them from presenting something that they had seen in the other class, right? So they couldn't sort of double dip on stuff like that. But I found that, for one, like I said, I had these people sort of emotionally dissatisfied that they felt like these other people had an advantage. And on the other hand, I had these students telling on each other that, hey, I presented this in this other class, and then she came and brought it in here, kind of thing. So how would you deal with something of that nature?
Well, I mean, maybe the curriculum needs to be revisited if there's too much overlap. I think a little bit's good. I actually had sort of the opposite problem. I had half my class that had discrete before they had the Intro to Proof class. And I actually designed my course notes based on where I was previously to minimize overlap. There's a little bit more now than...
It wasn't so much overlap in the subject matter as sort of maturity, being able to justify your arguments.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, there was a lot more rigor involved. And I think I had the advantage that none of my students in discrete had learned anything, so they were all basically, they had down their transcript, but they were all at the same place. And then they got to other places in the semester, like the topology stuff. They're all on even footing at that point, which I like. So.
I'm just interested to know, do they all get different writing assignments, their weekly writing assignments? How do you assign those?
So they have exercises, problems, and theorems. And some of the theorems have a star next to them. And what that means is they're eligible for weekly write-ups the following week. So there's usually like 3 to 6 starred problems, and they pick the 2 that they want to write up. And that's all over the map. So some students write up different ones than their buddies. It gives them ownership of which ones they think they can learn the most from. And what I really like about it is that it incorporates this multiple rounds of revision. Right? I didn't grade their work that seriously the first time they came in the room. Then we talked about it. They had their students' peers evaluate their work, and then they had to go back and reflect on it, which students never do. That's why I use previous week's work. And then they have to write down and reflect on what it was that they did, and oftentimes completely rewrite the proof that they had before they came in for the daily homework based on what they saw in class. So I like this multiple rounds of revision. And then I grade that one pretty harshly, but it's easy for me because they do much better because they're doing it for the second time. But I think it also serves them better. Yeah.
And do you allow them working on a group work, or they work their proofs individually?
Work what individually?
In a group or teamwork, or they work their proofs individually?
At home or in the math building when they're working, I encourage them to work together as much as they want. I really like that. And then again, as I said, sometime in the middle there, I even allow them to collaborate a little bit on the take-home exams.
And then one other thing I had is like, have you ever experimented by having them create their own problem, like star problems, that you might really see the production of them understanding the whole concept behind it?
Something that naturally happens the way the course notes are structured is I'm constantly encouraging them to make conjectures. So a lot of times we'll have like Sally's theorem, which might be an extension of something I had, or I might give them a problem that's true both ways, but I didn't bother putting the converse in there, and then someone will be like, wait, isn't the converse true too? And then we'll give that a name. That's Bob's theorem. And so these students sort of do that a little bit, they're encouraged to sort of keep thinking about that because I want them to be in this mode of being a mathematician, right? They should be thinking about what's the generalization. So a lot of times at the end of a section, I'll have a question, look at theorem 4.2, what's the most broad generalization you can make about that?